Good afternoon. So this is more an empirical approach I will take for this talk. We'll talk about social interaction patterns, therapist responsiveness, and outcome in a short-term treatment for borderline personality disorder. And really, we look at how can we describe social interaction patterns in the therapy session? How can we relate it to therapy outcomes by taking into account therapist behaviors? That's the right here. Okay, I think I can skip that. Just very shortly, I mean, mechanisms of change, we have talked about it so many times now. A general principle of change, explaining therapeutic changes that is consistent with the underlying theory and was demonstrated is responsible for the observed change related to treatment. So for this particular study, which we look at very early or short-term treatments, we would like to ask the question, which processes of change are so central that they change very early, very quickly over a few sessions and should be therefore fostered in treatments, maybe any treatments for patients with borderline personality disorder. Social interaction pattern, we think, is important, is central, and appears in the very first second of interaction with patients with BPD. It is central in several models of BPD psychopathology, and it, as I said, is central in the interaction, the here and now of in the therapy hour. Therapeutic interactions typically are externally focused. Patients may demand for extraordinary treatment. Mary's example this morning with the door is an interesting and very paradigmatic way of putting it. Patients border crossing within therapeutic settings may ask special aspects of self-harming suicidal behaviors with an instrumental component, but requiring specific attention, or relationship test behaviors, like the patient actually plays out in some interaction patterns that has a test character and requires the therapist to really pass that test. And this external focus has the potential to affect therapy, outcome, the process, and of course, therapist responsiveness. When you look into the literature, there is, from different conceptualizations, there is research on social interaction patterns in BPD. Because of time, I'm just going on very quickly, though sorry for all the details I'm missing here, but the CCRT research is central here, also historically, and there has been some research looking into different types of CCR2 interaction or social patterns, such as dependent depressive interaction. I wish to be dependent. The other is self-conscious and I feel depressed, but also sadomasochistic interaction. I wish to be heard. The other is not accepting me and I feel guilty. From larger, the borderline personality organization sense of Kernberg conceptualization, there are similar results been found in one other study by DG. In an earlier study, we described social interaction patterns in BPD and tried to link it with outcome and with symptom load in 30 patients with BPD, and were able to show that higher or more intense problematic social interaction was actually related with interpersonal problems in the beginning of therapy, but also hindered the progress of therapy. In particular, was linked with smaller change on the interpersonal scales after 10 sessions of therapy. Our second concept is therapist responsiveness. As we all know as clinicians, emerging information such as social interaction patterns affect the therapist's choice of intervention on a moment-by-moment interaction of treatment strategy level and treatment approaches. Stiles has talked about appropriate responsiveness. This has also been shown to be central for BPD. In this particular study, we use case formulation as a way to formulate explicitly how the therapist should be responsive on a moment-by-moment basis. We use plan analysis, which means that we use the patient's behavior to conceptualize and try to only respond to the motive or the behavior underlying acceptable motives or plans of the patient, and not the problematic behaviors which are apparent in the interaction. This was called by Kaspar motive-oriented therapeutic relationship and has been repeatedly linked with good therapeutic outcome. Hypothesis for this present study: the more the patient uses problematic or intense problematic social interaction patterns early in therapy, the smaller symptom change in the early treatment, and the link between the activation of social interaction patterns and outcome is moderated by the presence of specific therapist responsiveness, should be smaller in this case. We included 50 patients from a previously studied RCT, that's the study I just mentioned, where we compared to a short-term psychiatric treatment the individualizing responsiveness component based on the plan analysis. We had two groups in this RCT, and now we selected randomly 50 patients to do our analysis. The treatment is a 3-month treatment. I should say that this treatment does not, patients followed more treatment. It's not the end of their treatment, and has shown good effects for both groups and some advantages for the individualized treatment, showing that the basic to standard treatment is actually good enough, as underlined by Lois just before, and the individualized treatment has some advantages. The outcome measures OQ45 IAP BSL in this study, and the process measure, a little bit more time on this, is a new scale we have devised with SACSE, called Borderline Interaction Problem Scale. It's an observer-rated scaling at the reliable assessment of problematic social interaction patterns in psychotherapy sessions. Very easy, 1, 2, 3 anchors. Absent, the behavior is absent, is probable or present, or the attitude or cognition. It's integrative, should actually describe the problems from an integrative viewpoint. It has 3 parts and 8 items, as you can see here. The first part concerns social interaction patterns like images. I am needy, interaction constraints, constrain the therapist to do or not to do something. Admire me, for example. Interaction maneuvers. I am the victim of the others. These are complex maneuvers that maneuver the therapist into difficult interaction situations. And fourth, the relationship tests according to Weiss. The underlying motives and emotional schemes: I'm a failure, relationships are not trustworthy, and so forth. The third is a specific scale we developed related to trust with 3 aspects. Trust assumptions related to the person. My affects internally are not trustworthy. My actions are not have no effect. This is the own effectiveness. And the third aspect would be other persons. The classical, I mistrust other persons. The procedure, we had it's a random selection of 50 cases. We selected 3 sessions for rating. We did global ratings for all 3 sessions. Rated minutes 10 to 20. These are video and audio tapes and all transcribed sessions. So we rated minutes 10 to 20 for all 150 sessions. Raters, that's very important, were blind to condition and blind to outcome data. Preliminary results. So we looked at the reliability, very importantly. For 36% of the sample, we shown acceptable or good inter-rater reliability and also internal consistency for this new scale. We looked at outcome. We can confirm that the standard treatment was good or good enough, and individualized treatment was good or good enough, with slight advantages, but it was not an outcome study, so we did not compare the 2 treatments here. The BIP means per subscale and total did not differ between the 2 conditions. This is an average on scale, average activation of social interaction patterns. Looking at correlations per group, and these are all partial R's, controlling for the intake level of problems. Interestingly, when you look at the standard treatment, there's no significant relationship, so the interaction patterns seem to be independent of outcome in this case. Even though the 36 here is still, I can't really show it, is at the AT, that's the trust, it seems to be interestingly related with IAP. On the individualized treatment, interestingly, there is a negative correlation, meaning that the higher the activation of the interpersonal problems, interpersonal patterns, the better the outcome. The better the outcome, the lower the symptom load in the end of the treatment, which is actually a surprising finding. We actually postulated or hypothesized the other way around, but that's research. That's a systematic finding I will interpret later. Looking just at the individualized group, we were able to secure in this regression analysis that it was actually the emotional scheme and the social interaction subscales who were contributing to the effect, to the outcome effect in IIP, not so much the trust assumptions. What does this mean? Understanding, of course, as shown by all my colleagues, how therapy works is important and what client processes may be fostering productive therapy. Also looking at therapist aspects, in particular here in this study, responsiveness defined by using this individualized case formulation is important and maybe even more crucial than we initially thought when we look at the role of the activated interpersonal, problematic interpersonal patterns early in therapy. For standard good enough treatments, activation of aspects of social interaction patterns may not affect outcome. It's actually business usual. We have a straightforward approach and therapy will be sufficiently effective. For responsive treatments, however, the activation of a social interaction patterns affects outcome in a negative way. The more activated, the better the outcome. This might be that this interaction may be fostered by the therapist, but this was not the case because the means were comparable. So another explanation is that the patient uses the initial therapeutic context to charge or test the emerging relationship with the therapist because it is seen as threatening for him or her, this is a borderline patient, by playing his or her interaction problems out, in particular in interpersonal domains. And a therapist focusing on the underlying motives ensures that this interaction maneuver is responded to in an accurate fashion. So these are explanations. Maybe there are others. We're still looking into understanding this effect, which we did not expect. Limited number of observations, of course. We had global ratings. We looked at 3 sessions, and although we have minute-by-minute ratings, we put everything together. That's a limitation. We also have the BIP rating scales anchored very simply in 3 scores, which is, can be done very more and more differentiation would be interesting. The outcome was only self-reported. That's a major limitation. However, we linked it with a observer-rated measure which helped to control for shared variance problems. So social interaction patterns may play a pivotal role, should be studied more, as would be therapist responsiveness to them, and standard therapists may foster good enough outcome by fostering direct change, direct dialogue on the problem issues. However, responsive therapists may foster good outcome, good enough outcome via the activation of central social interaction patterns. Thank you.